What was the Cold War? Why did it happen? And how did it shape the world we live in today? Stick around as we unravel the story of this global conflict that never quite erupted into direct warfare, but nonetheless left an indelible mark on the 20th century. Before we dive into today's topic, I just want to remind you to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our latest videos. The Cold War, a term coined by English writer George Orwell in an article published in 1945, refers to the state of political and military tension after World War II, primarily between the United States and its allies, and the Soviet Union and its satellite states. This period, lasting roughly from 1947 to 1991, was marked by a variety of strategies, from propaganda and espionage to proxy wars and technological competition, particularly the space race. To understand the Cold War, we first need to delve into its background. The roots of the Cold War can be traced back to the closing days of World War II. Despite being allies against the Axis powers, the United States and the Soviet Union had fundamentally different visions for the post-war world. The United States championed a vision of democracy and capitalism, where nations would cooperate through international institutions like the United Nations and economies would thrive through free markets. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, sought to expand its communist ideology, emphasizing state control over the economy and a one-party political system. The seeds of discord were sown even before the end of World War II. As the Allied forces began liberating Europe from Nazi occupation, tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union started to surface. The Yalta Conference, held in February 1945, highlighted these emerging differences, while the leaders, Franklin D. Roosevelt of the United States, Winston Churchill of the United Kingdom, and Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union, agreed on the need to defeat Nazi Germany and discussed the post-war reorganization of Europe. There were significant disagreements on the specifics. The United States and the United Kingdom were wary of Soviet intentions in Eastern Europe, where Stalin aimed to establish a buffer zone of communist-friendly governments to protect against any future invasions. By the time the war ended in May 1945, the Red Army had already occupied much of Eastern Europe. The Soviet Union swiftly established communist governments in countries like Poland, Hungary, and Romania, consolidating its control over the region. This expansion alarmed the United States and its Western allies, who feared the spread of communism. These concerns were encapsulated in Winston Churchill's famous Iron Curtain speech in March 1946. Where he declared that an Iron Curtain had descended across the continent, separating the free West from the communist East. One of the first major crises of the Cold War was the Berlin blockade of 1948 to 1949. After World War II, Germany was divided into 4 occupation zones, controlled by the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union. Berlin, located deep within the Soviet zone, was similarly divided. In June 1948, the Soviet Union blocked all ground access to West Berlin in an attempt to force the Western Allies out of the city. In response, the United States and its allies organized the Berlin Airlift, a massive operation to supply West Berlin with food and fuel by air. This operation lasted for almost a year and underscored the determination of the West to resist Soviet pressure. The blockade was lifted in May 1949, but the city remained a focal point of Cold War tensions. In 1949, 2 pivotal events further solidified the divide between East and West. First, the United States and its allies formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a military alliance aimed at countering Soviet aggression. Shortly after, the Soviet Union successfully tested its first atomic bomb, ending the United States' monopoly on nuclear weapons and escalating the arms race. This development marked the beginning of a perilous period where both superpowers amassed vast arsenals of nuclear weapons, leading to a balance of terror known as mutually assured destruction. The Cold War was not confined to Europe. It played out on a global stage, affecting Asia, Africa, and Latin America. In 1949, the Chinese Civil War concluded with the communist forces led by Mao Zedong emerging victorious. The establishment of the People's Republic of China represented a significant expansion of the communist bloc, further alarming the United States. This development set the stage for a series of conflicts in Asia, most notably the Korean War. The Korean War, which lasted from 1950 to 1953, was one of the first hot wars of the Cold War era. Korea had been divided along the 38th parallel after World War II, with a communist government in the north and a pro-Western government in the south. In June 1950, North Korean forces, supported by the Soviet Union and later China, invaded South Korea. The United States, under the banner of the United Nations, led a coalition to repel the invasion. The conflict resulted in a bloody stalemate, with the border remaining at the 38th parallel. The Korean War underscored the global stakes of the Cold War, demonstrating that both superpowers were willing to engage in direct military conflict to protect their interests. Throughout the 1950s, the Cold War continued to shape international relations. In 1953, the death of Joseph Stalin brought some hope for a thaw in tensions. His successor, Nikita Khrushchev, initially pursued a policy of peaceful coexistence with the West. However, this period also saw significant confrontations, such as the Suez Crisis in 1956 and the Hungarian Uprising in the same year. The Suez Crisis, triggered by Egypt's nationalization of the Suez Canal, saw a brief military intervention by the United Kingdom, France, and Israel, opposed by both the United States and the Soviet Union. The Hungarian Uprising, a revolt against Soviet-imposed policies, was brutally suppressed by Soviet forces, demonstrating the limits of the Soviet Union's tolerance for dissent within its sphere of influence. The 1960s marked a particularly intense period of the Cold War. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. The crisis began when American reconnaissance discovered Soviet ballistic missiles being installed in Cuba, just 90 miles from the coast of Florida. President John F. Kennedy responded by imposing a naval blockade on Cuba and demanding the removal of the missiles. After 13 days of tense negotiations, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev agreed to withdraw the missiles in exchange for a public assurance that the United States would not invade Cuba and a secret agreement to remove American missiles from Turkey. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a turning point in the Cold War, highlighting the terrifying potential for nuclear annihilation and prompting both superpowers to seek ways to prevent such a crisis from occurring again. One of the outcomes of the Cuban Missile Crisis was the establishment of a direct communication line between Washington and Moscow, known as the Hotline, to allow for immediate and direct communication between the leaders of the two superpowers. Additionally, it spurred efforts to control the arms race, leading to the signing of the Limited Test Ban Treaty in 1963, which prohibited nuclear tests in the atmosphere, in outer space, and underwater. The Cold War also saw significant ideological and cultural battles. Both the United States and the Soviet Union invested heavily in propaganda to promote their respective ideologies. In the United States, the fear of communist infiltration led to the Red Scare and the activities of the House Un-American Activities Committee, which investigated and persecuted individuals suspected of having communist ties. In the Soviet Union, the government maintained strict control over information and used state media to propagate the virtues of communism and the evils of capitalism. The space race was another significant aspect of the Cold War. The launch of the Soviet satellite Sputnik in 1957 shocked the United States and spurred it to accelerate its own space program. This competition culminated in the Apollo 11 mission, which landed American astronauts on the moon in 1969. The space race not only demonstrated technological prowess but also served as a powerful symbol of ideological superiority. In addition to military and technological competition, the Cold War influenced global politics through the support of proxy wars and insurgencies. In Vietnam, the United States became deeply involved in a protracted and controversial conflict to prevent the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. The Vietnam War, which escalated in the 1960s and continued into the 1970s, became a costly and divisive conflict. It ended with the fall of Saigon in 1975 and the unification of Vietnam under communist control, representing a significant blow to American efforts to contain communism. In Latin America, the Cold War saw significant U.S. intervention to prevent the spread of communism. The Cuban Revolution of 1959, which brought Fidel Castro to power, established a communist regime just 90 miles from the United States. In response, the United States attempted to overthrow Castro through various means, including the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 and numerous assassination attempts. Throughout the region, the United States supported anti-communist regimes and insurgencies, often regardless of their human rights records, leading to decades of turmoil and conflict. In Africa, the decolonization process intersected with Cold War dynamics, as newly independent nations often found themselves caught between the two superpowers. The Congo crisis in the 1960s, for example, saw the United States and the Soviet Union supporting different factions in the struggle for control over the mineral-rich country. Similarly, in Angola and Mozambique, civil wars were fueled by Cold War rivalries, with both superpowers providing support to opposing sides. The 1970s saw a period of détente, or relaxation of tensions, between the superpowers. This was marked by several significant agreements, including the Strategic Arms Limitation talks, which resulted in the SALT I Treaty in 1972, and the Helsinki Accords of 1975, which aimed to improve relations between the Communist bloc and the West. Despite these efforts, the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union persisted, particularly in the Third World, where both powers continued to vie for influence. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 marked a significant escalation of Cold War tensions. The United States responded by supporting the Afghan Mujahideen, or Holy Warriors, who fought against the Soviet forces. This conflict drained Soviet resources and morale and contributed to the eventual disintegration of the Soviet Union. The 1980s saw the rise of a more confrontational approach from the United States under President Ronald Reagan, who described the Soviet Union as an evil empire and significantly increased defense spending. His administration also supported anti-communist movements around the world, including in Central America and Africa. The final decade of the Cold War was marked by significant changes within the Soviet Union itself. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became the leader of the Soviet Union and introduced a series of reforms aimed at addressing the economic stagnation and political corruption that plagued the country. His policies of glasnost, or openness, and perestroika, or restructuring, sought to make the Soviet system more transparent and economically viable. These reforms, however, also exposed the deep flaws and contradictions within the Soviet system, leading to increased demands for change and greater autonomy within the Eastern Bloc. In 1989, a series of peaceful revolutions swept through Eastern Europe, toppling communist regimes in countries like Poland, Hungary, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Romania. The fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989 became a powerful symbol of the end of the Cold War. These events culminated in the dissolution of the Soviet Union in December 1991, marking the official end of the Cold War. The world emerged from this period fundamentally changed, with the United States standing as the sole superpower and the ideological battle between communism and capitalism seemingly resolved in favor of the latter. The legacy of the Cold War is vast and multifaceted. It shaped international relations, influenced domestic politics, and left an indelible mark on global culture and society. The arms race led to the development of powerful and destructive weapons, raising ethical and moral questions about their use and the potential for future conflicts. The Cold War also spurred significant advancements in technology and science, particularly in the fields of space exploration and military research. The political landscape of the post-Cold War world has been profoundly influenced by the events and outcomes of this period. The collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War led to the emergence of new independent states and the realignment of political alliances. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which had been primarily focused on countering the Soviet threat, has had to redefine its role in a world where the primary adversary no longer exists. Similarly, Russia, the successor state to the Soviet Union, has struggled with its identity and place in the international order, oscillating between cooperation with and opposition to the West. Economically, the end of the Cold War facilitated the spread of globalization and the integration of markets. The collapse of communism in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union opened up these regions to capitalism and market reforms, leading to significant economic transformations. However, the transition from planned economies to market economies has been uneven, with some countries experiencing rapid growth and others facing prolonged economic hardship and instability. Culturally, the Cold War has left a lasting impact on art, literature, film, and media. The ideological struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union provided rich material for artists and writers, resulting in a vast body of work that reflects the anxieties, hopes, and fears of this period. From spy novels and films to abstract expressionism and socialist realism, the cultural output of the Cold War era offers valuable insights into the mindset and experiences of people living through this time. The Cold War also had significant social consequences. The constant threat of nuclear war created a pervasive sense of fear and uncertainty, leading to the construction of bomb shelters, the practice of air raid drills, and the popularization of post-apocalyptic themes in culture. At the same time, the ideological battle between communism and capitalism influenced social movements and policies within countries. In the United States, the civil rights movement, the women's liberation movement, and other social movements were shaped by the broader context of the Cold War, as activists sought to challenge inequalities and injustices in a society that proclaimed itself a beacon of freedom and democracy. In the realm of education and science, the Cold War spurred significant investment and advancements. The competition with the Soviet Union drove the United States to prioritize education in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, leading to the establishment of programs like the National Defense Education Act, and the creation of research institutions and initiatives that have had lasting benefits. Similarly, the space race led to numerous technological innovations that have since become integral parts of modern life. From satellite communications to advancements in computer technology, the Cold War also left a complex legacy in terms of human rights and civil liberties. Both the United States and the Soviet Union, despite their ideological differences, engaged in practices that violated human rights and suppressed dissent. In the United States, the Red Scare and McCarthyism led to the persecution of individuals suspected of communist sympathies, often based on flimsy or non-existent evidence. In the Soviet Union, dissidents faced harsh repression, including imprisonment, forced labor, and exile. The competition between the two superpowers often led to the support of authoritarian regimes and the suppression of democratic movements in the name of geopolitical strategy. As we reflect on the Cold War, it is essential to recognize that it was not a monolithic or static period. It evolved over time, shaped by the actions and decisions of countless individuals and influenced by broader social, economic, and cultural trends. The Cold War was a time of great challenges and dangers, but it also spurred remarkable achievements and transformations. Understanding this complex history can help us navigate the present and future, as we continue to grapple with the legacies of this pivotal period. In conclusion, the Cold War was a multifaceted and dynamic period that shaped the 20th century in profound ways. It was a time of ideological conflict, military tension, and global competition that influenced nearly every aspect of life. From the political and military strategies of the superpowers to the cultural and social changes experienced by ordinary people, the Cold War left an indelible mark on the world. By studying this history, we can gain a deeper understanding of the forces that have shaped our contemporary world and the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of the Cold War. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel.